you should be able to hear me now. Okay. So, as it is 7:30, I'm going to go ahead and do the final review. We might have a few more people joining us in the class, but okay, so this is going to cover chapter 1 through 9. That will be the first unit until unit 13. And the first part was mainly hardware. So let's go through the questions. Okay, the test is going to be multiple choice, 50 questions, 4 points each. So that's going to be 200 points total. And so most of these questions came from your prior assignments and your notes. So for number 1, when repairing a malfunctioning keyboard on a laptop, what is the first step in the keyboard removal procedures? And I forgot to mention that you can find the final review in the module on Canvas. So when you're repairing a malfunctioning keyboard, we want to disconnect the keyboard from the AC power, and we want to remove the battery, and that was covering in the first week. So we want to make sure that it's safe to be able to open it up. For number 2, the type of hardware that delivers the best performance in the laptop, that will be your solid state drive. Compared to HDD, solid state is a better option as it writes and reads faster. For number 3, what type of RAM module is used in a laptop? That will be your SODIMM. It stands for Small Outline Dual Inline Memory Module. This is a smaller module than your regular RAM. For number 4, what is the functionality of the digitizer in the touchscreen of the laptop? So as most laptops uses touchscreen now, it is used to detect and transmit touches to the system. And you see this on your smartphone screen as well, the digitizer. So it's used to sense touch. So we need to know the type of cable that's shown here, right? And we did this for one of our lab exercises already. Okay, so make sure that you know you distinguish between, so 5 is going to be USB-C, right? Micro, mini, and then this is your Apple, and this is for the old Lightning. So you can type out the answer, or you can go back to our earlier lab and you will also find the keys as we covered that already. Also in your notes. So for number 6, describe the wireless connection for mobile devices. So mobile devices would use near field communication, your NFC. We also have Bluetooth for our portable device connection, like your earpiece. Infrared, you can use it as a remote control. 802.11 Wi-Fi, so that will be either AC, or if you're using an old router, that will be your N, but most of them now are all AC. And then you are able to use cellular network. So these are the type of wireless technology that's incorporated in your mobile devices, like your smartphone. Not all tablets would have the cellular capability as it doesn't receive SIM card, but some of them would be able to use cellular network. For 7, we want to distinguish between the PRL and the PRI. And this is pertaining to your mobile devices. So PRL is used for roaming in cellular networks. And PRI is used to control data in the mobile devices. As most of us are paying for data packages, so make sure that we know the difference between them for the test. For question 8, why is radio firmware important? So as you know, most of the IoT devices might have radio frequency systems, updates that improve reliability. So a lot of it, the firmware is going to give us stability in connection or the reliability of the data communications transfer. For question 9, define network protocols. And network protocols are standards and policy for system communication to establish services. For example, HTTP is used for web requests. And so that will work across the board for all browsers. So this is really implemented for development purposes. So make sure what we know that for what protocols do. For question 10, which protocol is collecting and organizing information about managed devices on IP networks? And that's your SNMP, simple network. Okay, so when you use SNMP, you can use it to manage your network, and it will be version 1 or version 2. Version 2 is better in reliability than version 1. For question 11, when administrator implements Active Directory role, which allows the user to log into the network using authentication methods such as username and password, which protocol is implemented to support Active Directory role on the server? We did this for the lab. When you install Active Directory, it uses Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or your LDAP. And Active Directory simply is a role in your Windows Server. It stores user groups, objects such as systems. We're able to use it to manage objects for authentication purposes and also control or granting access. Any questions so far? If I'm going too fast, let me know. But again, this will be recorded and released on Canvas tonight. Question 12. Identify the common ports that's used in the following protocols. Right? You have POP3, which uses port 110. HTTP uses port 80. SSH uses port 22. Telnet uses port 23. So beyond A+, when you take Network Plus certification and Security Plus, you need to know your port number. And it's just a value that's associated with the protocol for communication purposes. 13. Felix has an old computer that runs Windows 2000. He wants to connect the system to his home network, which consists of newer systems. What protocol allows Felix Windows 2000 system to be visible on the network? And that will be NetBIOS. Because in the old system, it uses system name or host name instead of IP addresses to be able to locate. So when I join the domain, right, I have to make sure that it supports the NetBIOS, and also it has to have a Win server. For question 14, in a network that consists of two systems, an iMac Pro 2017 that runs Mac OS 10.12 or High Sierra, and an iMac 2013 which run Mac OS 10.9 Mavericks. Which protocol will support communication between these systems? And we would use AFP, and this is for Apple. So when you have systems that are connecting that are Apple systems, you want to refer to AFP. Now, Apple does have their own server and also storage server, but what you would see is that sometimes people would refer to other type of server because Apple server can be very pricey. Question 15 on the final review. Which Wi-Fi standard has throughput of 150 megabit per second on a single 20 megahertz channel? And that is your 802.11n. So when you see 802.11, you automatically would know that it is a wireless standard. And the current standard is the AC, but the prior standard before the AC is N. So when you look at some of the wireless network that's older, it would use 802.11n, but most people have upgraded to AC, but doesn't necessarily mean everyone. So on the 802.11n, it transfer at 150 megabit per second. So let's say that I buy a smartphone that uses 802.11 AC, which is the newer standard. I can connect it to 802.11n. So the fastest that it's going to connect using that router is going to be 150 megabit per second. So we actually bring down the throughput because we have an older router. So even if you upgrade your device, all of your devices in the network should be upgraded. Otherwise, you're going to have slow throughput at one point, especially if it's a router. "16. Which wireless frequency is best suited for long-range signals?" And that will be your 2.4 gigahertz. So as you configure your home router, which most likely is an AC router, 802.11 AC, it uses dual band, a 5 gigahertz and a 2.4 gigahertz. 5 gigahertz is going to give you high signal in a short distance, whereas 2.4 gigahertz is going to give you longer distance at a lower frequency. So give or take, right? So most of your devices, like your TV, your smart TV, your IoT devices, operate at 2.4 gigahertz instead of 5 gigahertz. You can connect them at 5 gigahertz, but a lot of the times they are equipped to do 2.4. So for example, my wireless camera, it is only capable of connecting at 2.4 gigahertz. And I can install that around my home parameter compared to what you would see in some of the devices like my laptop that will be connecting at 5G. Let me move 17 down so we can see it all together. 17, we need to identify the appropriate video connector based on the below image. So on the left side, you would see a DB connector, and it's often either blue or black. Okay. It has 9 pins. So that will be a VGA. Number 2 next to it is your common HDMI. HDMI gives you sound and video. So on a VGA, when you connect the monitor and if it doesn't detect it, you need to reboot the system. And then number 3, adjacent to the HDMI is your DVI-I. I think we talked about this before. So DVI came a little after VGA, and VGA stands for Video Graphic Array. So on that adapter on the left, it's able to, we can use 3 types of connection. So if you have a monitor that use HDMI, you can plug it into the HDMI, or you can use older connection. And then on the right, which is an older video adapter, it uses S-video, and it would be round. You would see this in the older technology. So back then we would use S-video or VGA or the DVI. Okay. Now you can also buy adapter to adapt it. So if you have an old video adapter and you have a newer monitor, you can buy an adapter to adapt. So that way it will work with the newer monitor. For 18, ABC Tech Company wants to install fiber optic between 2 branches, branch 1 and branch 2. These locations are 25 miles apart. What type of fiber optic cable should ABC Tech use? And they would use single mode fiber optic, as single mode fiber optic would be going longer distance versus multi-mode, and single mode uses laser, multi-mode uses LED. And so fiber optic is glass based, so inside for the strands, there are glass strands, and it emits light signal. So it is faster, more reliable, and have less interference than your copper, like Ethernet cable, which has less distance and transmit with lower speed signal. For 19, what are the differences between USB 3.1 Gen 1 and 3.2 Gen 2? So the 3.2 Gen 2 supports Type-C, which is what you see today. Not all Type-C is capable of adapting video, but for most part, we would see that Type-C can be used for power, data transfer, and video connection. It is a reversible connector. So no matter how you plug it in, it still be okay. If you flip it upside down, it'll still plug in. So when you use a USB Type-C cable, make sure that you read the spec for the cable, because some USB-C that is not fully capable of doing video and some are, depending on the classification of it. Okay, like for example, if you use that to charge your mobile devices, most of those cable they can't be used for video. All right, 20, list the types of hard drive cables. So we have a SATA, the serial ATA. We saw this. So this is a flat cable, almost look like a USB cable, but the connector is an L shape. We have an eSATA for external serial ATA hard drive. Before they made a lot of USB external hard drive, we have the serial ATA that's called eSATA. Then we have the flat ribbon cable, which is an IDE. It's gray and it's flat and it has like a color on the edge, and that color on the edge classify it as pin 1, and that's how you plug it in. And it has a missing pin. It has 40 pins. And then we have a SCSI, which is an older cable, and we can daisy chain the drives together using SCSI drive. So SCSI, you would call that SCSI. Okay. SCSI would use for data storage and backup back then. And some companies still use some of the older drives, but gradually it has gone away. 21, the maximum number of SCSI drives that can be daisy chained together. So when we say daisy chain, what do we mean? Think about how you plug Christmas lights in to your house and trees, right? So you have an extension cord, and then you plug one strand into the extension cord, and then you take another line of lights and you plug it into the original, the first set of lights. And so you basically chain them together. And so the power just passed through one to the next, and so on. So how we connect the drives together was when we would use the cable to daisy chain them. And so we can do a group of 7 drives on the SCSI, or the group of 15 drives, and they have different 2 types of SCSI. And at the end of your chain, you have to terminate it. So because as the signal would end on the last drive. So that's how we were able to transfer data from drives to drive back then. Any questions with these? Okay. Next, we're gonna look at your RAM. And based on the picture, the important part is to look at the pin size and the notch of your memory module. They look pretty close, right? So from the top, you have a DDR1. We went over this in our notes and lecture. Below, right below 1 is DDR2. And DDR stands for double data rate. And so when you have the DDR2, it means it's double the double data rate. And then the DDR3 is below DDR2. And as you notice that the 1 and the 2 looks really close, that the notch is almost in the middle. But on the 3, the right side is shorter than the left. And then on the DDR4 is right below the DDR3. And so it is the notch that's also a little closer to the left side. And in the notes, it gives you the transfer rate of those. So just make sure that we're able to identify the differences in our memory modules. You can always use the sticker if you're not sure, right? 23, comparing the parity in ECC, which technology is recommended for maximum data safety, and explain. So ECC stands for Error Correction Code. It's used to correct data error after the error is detected. So when do we receive data error is when it writes to the memory module and for some reason it runs across error. So when you pay for RAM and if the RAM comes with ECC, it's usually a little bit more in money compared to ones that's not. Okay. And then parity is just it's checking the bits, whether it's odd or even. And so if the data is then would be yield an even bits, then it would be able to identify whether the data is correct or not. So ECC elevates it by having a code to correct the error compared to just parity where it checks the content that is comparable. 24, identify the types of RAID. And RAID stands for redundant array of inexpensive disk. So we start with RAID 0. You have to have 2 drives. And when you buy a motherboard for your computer, let's say you build a computer, some motherboard would support RAID and some doesn't, right? So you can select the type of RAID. So if you use RAID 0, you have to have 2 RAID 0 drives and it stripes. That means that it writes from top, the first drive, the second drive, and it just stripe across. So if one of your drive fail, you would lose your data, but it does do write fast. RAID 1 is requiring also 2 drives and it uses mirroring. So the data that you have on the first drive is copied to the data on to the second drive. So it's the exact duplicate data. So that's why it's mirroring. So if one of your drive fail, you still have your data intact. RAID 5, you have to have 3 or more drives and it would stripe across 3 drives. RAID 5 is better than RAID 0 in that it does parity check. So you do have some data integrity. So if one of your drive fail out of the 3, it still works. But if 2 of your drives fail, you lose your data. RAID 10 is a combination or a combined option of 0 and 1. Some people would refer to 01, but most of the time in the industry, they call this RAID 10. It means that we're going to mix stripe and error and mirror to make it fast and reliable. So you do have copy of data and also writing data fast. So it increased the performance. Most businesses, they would use RAID 10. And then they also have RAID 6 and other RAID, but those are not as popular. So these are the popular ones that you would see. So make sure you know RAID for CompTIA and final exam. 25, what is the primary difference between PCI and PCI-X bus? So for your Express, right, your X is going to be at 64-bit, which is faster than the old PCI. And you looked at this on the motherboard. The PCI is color-coded white, whereas the PCX is usually dark gray or black. So the transfer rate is much faster in the X compared to the PCI, regular old PCI. For 26, what are the main characteristics of LGA? And this is referring to your CPU. This is a design that was implemented by Intel. So all the Intel processor uses LGA. LGA design uses spring-loaded LANs in the processor socket, which connects the bumps onto the backside of the processor. The number of lands in the processor socket is used for numeric part of the socket name. So when you're looking at an i7 or an i9 processor, it will tell you LGA and a number. And now you know that number means it's the number of lands in the processor socket and how that's connected. So the socket is the slot where you connect the processor. For 27, what is the transfer rate of the latest SATA connection? And currently in the market, we're using SATA 3. It transfer data at 6 gigabit per second. So your hard disk drive or your external hard drive sometimes uses SATA. Not all of them are SSD. You do have some option with SSD now, but when you're using SATA, right, it transfer at 6 gigabit per second. Like the external hard drive that you use in class for the lab, that's the SATA 3. 28. The difference between active and passive heatsink is that the active heatsink consists of a fan, and this is what we're referring to, the top piece that goes on top of your CPU. So when you install your CPU, you have to put a heatsink, and you can choose to do liquid cool, or you can choose to use air cool or fan cool. So an active heatsink, it would be like a metal fins that connects to a fan, whereas a passive heatsink does not include a fan. It's just a heatsink. So for other processor, you might have just that metal fin, that metal piece that goes on top of the chip, like for your North Bridge or your South Bridge on the motherboard, which are other chips that are in charge of like your components, like your hard disk drive and so on for the North Bridge. So when you look at a Raspberry Pi, it's the same, right? They send you a Raspberry Pi with the heatsink, and you put it on top of the processor to keep it cool. So on the Raspberry Pi, it uses passive heatsink where it doesn't have a fan on top. Unless you buy a heatsink that has a fan, you can attach it, and that's like an accessory. For 29, the purpose of KVM switch, and you see this a lot in data center or in warehouses where you only have like a set of keyboard, mouse, and monitor for multiple computers. So KVM stands for keyboard, video, and mouse. It enables single keyboard display and mouse to support 2 or more computers. So you can share the monitor, the keyboard, and the mouse across multiple towers using KVM. And it's just simply a device that you buy so you can connect the computer to that device, and then your mouse and keyboard so you can share the input devices for those systems. Number 30, the purpose of power supply is to convert power from Sorry, I got disconnected from Zoom. I'm on the school network. Lately, it's been kind of spotty. Okay, 31. The voltage ranges, what voltage ranges does a dual voltage power supply support? So you would have 115 to 120 volts at frequency of 60 hertz. And that's your North American range. 220 to 240 volts, 50 hertz. That's for other continents. So on the power supply, in the back for most of the power supply, you would see that there's a little glider. You can configure your ranges for the voltage. So out of the box, your power supply should be set on 115 to 120, right? Unless you live somewhere else in the world, then you can use your 220 to 240 volts. You can switch the glider over. For 32, refer to the image and we need to identify the connector. On the left side, this is for your motherboard power connection and other device on the motherboard, right? And we talked about form factor, ATX, and so on. So number one is your ATX 12 volt secondary. And most of your computer components need 12 volts to be able to work. 12 volts or less. Some are 3 volts and 1 volt. Like your hard disk drive needs 12 volt. 2 is going to be your I don't know why I put UX there. That should be ATX secondary. Okay. Then for 3, when you look at this, that will be, it has 20 pins. So that will be your ATX primary 20 pin. So when we say primary, that will be the primary power to the motherboard. And secondary, that will be for other devices. And then lastly, on the right-hand side in white, your number 4 is your ATX 12 volt 2.2 primary 24 pins. So compare 3 to 4, it's still for ATX, but your number 4 has more pins. Now on the newer power supply, the cable are reconfigurable. So it works with sometimes both. So, you know, but when you buy your motherboard, make sure that you look at the power supply connection so you can buy the right type of power supply. And your form factor, as you can see here, plays an important role. So ATX. Okay, 33. In printers, what are the 7 steps in electrophotographic EP process? And this is done before it prints. So you would have step 1 is processing. Most of your printer now would have some kind of RAM. It would temporarily store your data. And then for 2, it will be charging. Step 3 is exposing. 4 is developing. 5 is then transferring. And 6 is fusing. And then 7 is going to clean. This is seen on the laser printer, which is used by most business because it's fast and it can print in mass compared to your home printer, which is only inkjet or DeskJet. Identify the color toners for the color laser printer. We would have cyan or cayenne, magenta, yellow, and black. And just like your inkjet, They are separate toners. And so you would install them. So using these colors, it would be able to mix the color and give you other colors. So make sure we know these colors for final and A+. What should you clean? Why should you clean up loose toner on the laser printer? Because if you don't, over time, it can cause jam. Dirty rollers will cause jam, and also it can cause dirty print because there are little powder that will be stuck to the paper. Okay, so just to prevent printer damage. So the best thing to do to clean it up is to use a small vacuum cleaner. Those hand vacuum works really well. So whenever I used to repair printers, I would bring a vacuum cleaner with me. And so you can use that. So you can remove the toner, turn it off, and then open up the compartment, and then you can use it to clean it up. So there are a lot of jobs for just to maintain printers as a support technician with different company like Xerox and so on. Identify 3 types of services in your cloud computing. We have IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, which consists of storage, networking. So we can put an entire company network onto the cloud, which is another organization server like AWS. And we can configure, right, server system using virtualization. We can also use it to store data. SaaS is for software as a service. This is used to deploy software applications. So on the DevOps side, we would then can deploy our web application using SaaS, like the app that you use on your smartphones, right? All of them are web app, like the games that you play, the Google Map that you use. PaaS is platform as a service, that this is used for development of applications and software tools. So for the software company like Oracle, they would have platform as a service. The features and benefits of IaaS. It is flexible for virtual resources and pay for usage as necessary, so we can pay as we go. A lot of companies choose cloud nowadays because it shifts the overhead to the vendor, so they don't have to buy new servers. They'll just use somebody else's server and lease it. Users can take charge of the operating system, the software applications, while provider supplies the hardware, equipment, networking. So on top of that, you also save on power, right? Maintenance of that system. So it's like renting a car and driving it. You don't have to do the oil change on it and, maintaining the brakes on it. You just drive it. But you're going to pay as you go, right? Describe virtual computing. And we've been using virtualization for a bit in some of our labs. Virtual computing technology creates and runs multiple instances of software operating systems. So we can have Linux and Windows 10 and Windows Server all at once, depending on your hardware capability. Multiple software systems sharing the resources of one hardware system known as virtualization. So you have to have a host, right, to be able to implement virtualization. which is we can use a hypervisor, a software, to be able to simulate another system. Virtualization is here to stay, so we have to learn how to work with it. 39. The difference between virtualization and emulation. The virtualization enable a single system to run 2 or more OSs at the same time using the same hardware resources. And yes, you can do this with dual boot, but in dual boot, you're only able to do, right, one OS at a time. In emulation, it involves software-based reproduction of OSs without the functionality and the resources used of virtualization. So when you hear the term emulation, it's not the same as virtualization. It is for software production, like applications of OSs. For 40, the appropriate cloud services based on the scenario. A small business that pays for the hours of cloud storage that will be metered service. So they pay as they go. B, Terry uses iCloud to store her smartphone contact list and options. That will be your cloud storage service like Google Drive or iCloud, right? Same thing, different company. C, Gotham Inc. employees uses Gmail to access email inbox, outbox, and contact. This is an off-site email application service. Smaller companies, instead of using email servers, they would obtain service from Google or Microsoft to maintain their email application service. So that's considered off-site email application service. Then for D, Coffee.com requires cloud services that has the flexibility to adjust high or low online sales throughout the year. So if they sell a lot, they would need more storage or cloud space. If they sell less on the low months, they can reduce that. That's called rapid elasticity. And most service provider has this capability. AWS, Google, Microsoft, IBM, so on. For 41, what are the 6 steps in troubleshooting devices? You will see this with CompTIA. It's across all their certifications. Okay. First, we identify the problem. Second, we establish the theory of probable cause. We would ask obvious questions, and we're going to try to come up with probable cause. Third, we're going to test the theory to determine the cause. Fourth, we would create a plan of action to resolve the problem and implement solution. Fifth, we would verify full system functionality after we got it working, and we would implement preventative measures. So if you have a user that continues to download malware, at this point, after you fix the problem, you want to educate that user. And you need to teach them how to use anti-malware. And then lastly, the 6th step is to document your findings and actions and outcomes. So this will help you use the same solution in future problems or learn from your lesson. (42) What is the common cause of your system lockups? The most common cause is memory corruption. This is often with Windows system where you have blue screen of death. So memory content corruption. 43, Larry's computer does not turn on. What could be the common cause? Could be a few things, right? So we would say that it might be power supply. That's bad, because if it doesn't receive power, it won't turn on. Lose power cable connection. If it's not fully plugged in, it won't turn on. Power button is not pressed. It is obvious, but a lot of people don't do it. Okay. So we would have them check the case to see if they press the power button. Usually the button has a light, sometimes not. Bad power connection, whether it's coming from the surge protector that goes bad or the power source. Sometimes it could be the outlet, but less of a case. So a lot of this comes back to power. And if you have a bad power supply, you're going to have a frequent restart on your computer as well. And then incorrect or missing front panel connection. So if they plug in, so when you assemble your computer, there's a section on the motherboard that's designated to buttons and control. And so you have to connect like your USB header and your case button connection, right? So if they plug in the wrong pin, then it won't work even when they press the button. So incorrect or missing front panel connection. Any question? We're almost there. Okay. Okay, for 44, what are the common causes of overheating with computer? Overloading, right? So if you are turbo boosting all the time, that can cause a lot of heat. Fan failure, meaning that if your fan stopped working, and fan replacement is fairly cheap, so you want to make sure that your system is cool. Inadequate airflow outside the system, so it's not able to pull cold air in. Inadequate airflow inside the system. So what do we do with that? We clean it, right? We spray out all the dust, the lints. And dirt and dust can also cause overheating. So we're gonna make sure that it's clean and the air circulates. 45. Jacqueline turns on her computer. She notices a strong burning smell coming from the inside of her computer. What could be the cause? What is your advice to fix this problem? So burning smell would mean burnt power supply. You need to replace the power supply. It could also be the back capacitor on the motherboard, and you would see residue on the capacitor, and these are like, they look like little metal tube, small, right? Like a size of an eraser or a pencil. So if you look at some of the capacitor, if it's bad, then you might have like little residue, grayish or oxidized type residue on the outside. And that could also be in the power supply. So we can replace the capacitor. And in replacement of capacitor, you have to know how to work with the motherboard and you have to solder it. So a lot of times the effort going into that and the replacement part would probably cost more in time and effort. So we would then just sometime replace the motherboard. 46. What should you do when you encounter Vsod, blue screen of death? And in Windows, the newer Windows, you would see like a little unhappy face and then a message, a memory error message. So we would record the error code. We would use that error code to look up the issues. It would usually ask you to restart the system. So we would reboot and research the error for repair. "47. How can you improve performance of SATA disk?" And this is your hard disk drive, your HDD. We can remove the jumper or set the jumper to the related drive speed. Sometimes that can set on the wrong setting, so that reduces the speed, especially on the SATA. We would use appropriate SATA cable. So if you have SATA 3, you wanted to make sure it's SATA 3. It's usually printed on the cable. They look almost the same, but it will tell you which SATA it is. We would configure SATA host adapter for appropriate mode, and this is done in BIOS or UEFI. That will be your IDE, RAID, AHCI, and so on. So we want to make sure that we select the right mode. We would choose auto setting for SATA host adapter speed and set the appropriate speed. Okay, so make sure that we're using its maximum potential. "48. Describe the purpose of self-monitoring analysis and reporting technology known as SMART feature on the hard drive." And when you buy hard drive, it will tell you, right, if it has this feature or not. So this feature is used to detect drive temperature, read retries, slow spin up, and bad sectors, drive failure warning. So in the case where if there's malfunctioning in your drive or potential malfunctioning because of heat, right, of your sector and so on, the self-monitoring analysis reporting technology is useful. And so yes, those drive tends to be a little more than the ones that don't have it, but most of the time you will see this in HDD now. How do you troubleshoot flickering issue on the laptop LCD monitor? We want to update our graphic adapter or your GPU driver. So we want to update the driver. We also need to check for a failing inverter, and we would need to replace the inverter if it's going bad. We would check for backlight failure, and we can replace the backlight fails. So I have a TV, an LED TV that has this problem, and I found out that it is a power supply issue. So when it's not receiving the appropriate power or the current flow, it flickers, right? But on an old TV, if you have a screen that it's flickering, usually there are two common problems: is the failing inverter or the backlight failure if it's LCD. Any question? Okay, we're almost there. Okay, just a little more to go. "50. Mobile devices, what's the cause of the swollen battery?" overcharging. And you know when it's swollen, when you place it on a flat surface and it wobbles. Okay, laptops, Chromebooks tend to do that, and other appliances. '51. Your work laser printer causes streaks on prints. How do you correct this issue? When it's printing dirty, right? Replace the toner cartridge and also clean it. Clean the printer with the vacuum. '52. What type of file systems are used in Windows OS? We talked about file system when we did the installation of the virtual machine. You got FAT32, file allocation table 32-bit. This was used since Windows X, actually 98, going to XP. XP all the way up till Windows 7, and then transition to EXFAT, which is 64-bit. Most of our OSs today, including Windows 11, uses New Technology File System, or NTFS. And NTFS is used since Windows NT 4.0, but it's integrated for the use of encryption and security for file control and compression. This is when you right click the folder, you can choose property, advanced, and then choose encrypt. So it supports the EFS. Now Cdfs is for your compact disk. So this is a file system that's used for optical disk. You see this on the virtual machine. So all your storage devices, like your USB, out of the box, it is FAT formatted to be compatible with all OSs, right? And we can also change the format. Okay, but FAT has limitation in maximum size. So as we answer number 53, what is the maximum logical partition size of FAT32 drive? That is 2 terabytes. So on the new external hard drive that you see that they sell, that's like 4 terabyte or 8 terabyte, that will be your EXFAT that they use to format. So it's able to use a larger volume, right? 54. The maximum amount of memory that can be used by 32-bit Windows OS is going to be 4 gig. So when you have a Windows 7 system that uses 32-bit, right? Because the processor is for 32-bit. The most RAM that you should have in it is 4 gig. I remember back in the day, people used to upsell the RAM, right? Oh, add more RAM, it will help. But 32-bit, you can, for Windows OS, it's only 4 gigs. A little under, like 3.96. 55. The maximum EXFAT drive volume capacity is 512 terabyte. Recommended. But Microsoft claims that theoretically they can use up to 64 zettabyte, and zeta means a billion terabyte. So like I said, on the new external hard drive or the new drives formatted as EXFAT, because it's able to use larger volume for that file system. 56. A client asks you to restore her Windows 10 system. How do you begin the process? We would start with settings, then we would go to recovery, and then we would click get started under reset this PC. Right, the restore process is always going to take a little bit of time. Question 56B. Which reset option do you select if the client wishes to save her personal files? Then we would choose keep my files option. And sometimes if the files are corrupted, we won't be able to keep it. So I always try to copy the files over to an external drive and then use that as also a backup of a backup in case. How many primary partitions can be created using master boot record or your MBR? For the master boot record, you can have 4 primary partitions. That means we can section our drive into 4 compartments. And one of those is going to be an active partition for boot OS, for bootable OS. But on the GPT, which is a different way that we can partition our drive, we can have up to 128 primary partitions, and GPT supports the later use of your storage and multiple OSs. MBR was legacy and it's still being used today, but it was designed for the older system. So that's why you have less of the partitions. 58. How many extended partition can be stored on a physical drive? You should have 1 extended partition per drive. Any questions with these? Move some of the question up. You can see. 59. In Windows command prompt, identify the commands for the following tasks. A, display TCP/IP network information on the device. So we would use ipconfig on Windows system, right? And then on Linux, the new command is IP address. ifconfig no longer works with Debian Linux because they don't support that package anymore. For B, when we want to scan the C drive for errors and repair, we would use check this. So check this C:. If you want to scan another drive like E drive, you do the same thing, but replace the C with the E. 59C, when you want to stop an executable like Notepad on a local or remote computer, we would do a task kill img notepad.exe. We practice command prompt quite a bit. Okay. We look at task list and task kill in our lab exercises. Question. Okay. We didn't do this one, but you can try it. When you want to add a user to your system, such as a Mendoza and a password, we would use a command called netuser. And you type in the username and the password next to it, and then you would use the command option add. So netuser, username, password, add. Then the last one on 59, when we want to format F drive using NTFS file system, we would use format command, then the drive letter F, then we would do a /fs NTFS. So fs:/NTFS. I lied. That wasn't the last. On the F, we want to list existing drives and volumes. We would use this part, which is a utility. Once you type in this part, then you have to enter list disk or list volume. So when you do this part, it's going to run the executable, and then you use the command list disk or list volume. What is the function of Windows Memory Diagnostic tool? How do you access this tool in Windows 10? And remember, we did this, and when we reboot, it can do the diagnostic for our memory. So it tests system and cache memory before the Windows desktop is loaded. And so we normally would do this at startup. You can also use Windows and R key, and then you would type in that Windows R key is just the run command. And I know Windows 10, they disable a lot of the run option, but when you type in MDS, right, CHED, that just means that you want to schedule. Okay. For 61, Paul's Windows 7 computer is unstable. It runs slower than usual and has problems starting up and shutting down. Which Windows administrative tool is useful in determining whether the program or service running when the system starts at fault? So here we are going to talk about now the utilities, right? So msconfig is one of the utility that we can use. And in that, I think we did this for the lab. We looked at what is running. And then we can take a look at how we would be able to change that. When should you use storage spaces in Windows 8.1? So 8.1 has some additional weird names to some of the utility. They changed up the interface a little bit on 8.1, and then when they redesigned Windows 10, they went back to kind of like what we've seen with Windows 7 and modify the interface to look close to that. So 8.1, we would use storage spaces when we're setting up RAID or creating a storage pool, which consists of a group of drives. For 63, in Windows 7, when should you use regedit? You got to be careful when you edit the registry, because the registry keeps record of your user accounts, right? Like when you add things to your browser to favorites, it's in your registry. When you install application, it's in your registry. And it updates the key. So it's like a database of objects configuration. So to view the system setting that cannot be viewed in other interfaces, we can go to the registry. Second, B, we can add or modify or change values or remove certain registry key that cannot be changed in normal menus and applications. Like we would be able to remove traces of program or hardware. You don't have to put this down verbatim. I just want to keep notes of this. That was not installed properly. So let's say you install it halfway and you change your mind, but we want to remove the traces of the program. or we can use it to allow new devices program to be installed. In computer forensic for Windows, we go to the registry and we can find out a lot of information about that user and that system, right? And before we do that, we have to do a backup and so on of the image, and we evaluate the image. And so lastly, we can access the registry to back up its file to like a USB or storage. '64, a client asks you for assistance in troubleshooting his Windows 10 professional PC. Which utility do you use to access his computer remotely for troubleshooting process? That will be your MSTSC. And it would use your RDP protocol, which allows you to connect to the desktop. So the keyword for this question is this, and this is the tool. And we can always search everything in Windows 10, right? 65, what program is used to send and receive remote assistance invitation? And that is your MSRA program. So you have to set up, right, an authorized remote assistance for somebody to be able to connect. And you can set that up for a window of time. What are the benefits of applying full duplex setting on a network adapter? And so now we're going to talk about network adapter and security. So network adapter can send and receive at the same time when you're using full duplex. So it's a two-way communication if it's full duplex. If it's simplex, it can only go one way. That means it can either send or receive, not both. So if we want both, we have to set it for full duplex, which is defaulted for most of our adapter. It will give you double the throughput compared to half duplex or simplex. So you are able to have higher throughput in communication as you send and receive at the same time. '67, why is physical security important in an organization? Because physical security measures provide protection to equipment, facility access, and people safety. Right? So when we talk about physical security, locks on door, fencing, surveillance system, fire extinguisher, body security guard at the door, and so on. It really protects the assets of the company, which is building, people, equipment. '68, why is port management important in system security? Because unused ports can be accessed by attackers or for unauthorized access. So turning off unused ports make it harder for attackers to find stealthy access to your system. Right? And we can use a port scanner to look for open ports, and so do they. But you can quickly access, you can block ports using your firewall, like your Windows firewall. But we need to disable the application, the ports, the things that we don't use. We should turn it off. Why is email filtering important in network security? It allows you to prevent malware, phishing attacks, and spam, right? Because a lot of the times malware comes in from email. Now it comes in from download too, right? But a lot of the time they phish information. They try to get the user to type in some sensitive data by phishing attacks, and then spam. Three types of malware. You can list any of the ones that are common. So I decide to list ransomware. Ransomware requires payment to release resources of that system. Like normally they would encrypt the drive. Sometimes they would disable certain functionality of a certain system. But the common thing is CryptoLocker, where it encrypt the drive. And then even if you pay, you can't get the right key. So sometimes company opt for just to rebuild the data. Trojan is that it masquerade under a common or mimic a common type of application. So you have a malware that's hiding inside a common application or a lookalike. Keylogger is where it records every keystroke, and that can be used within pass-through embedded links, websites, and so on. Virus, it needs human intervention, and virus can cause damage to files, system files, and ultimately your system. So malware just simply does damage. If you list a worm itself replicate, that means it doesn't need human intervention. The common social engineering tactics, you can list a few, like phishing is one, right? They entice you to give up your sensitive information. Like you won $1 million, give me your checking account and I will transfer the money. Spear phishing, that is different than phishing in that it focuses on a group or a certain entity. So there it's targeted, like executives, managers. Okay. Impersonation, pretend to be someone else, someone you trust, because social engineering only works when you build up the level of trust. Shoulder surfing, looking over someone's shoulder, pretending to stand nearby. Tailgating, follow someone into the building because they don't have access to the building. Dumpster diving is where they would go through the garbage to look for sensitive mail, documents, and so on. So you need to shred everything that you dispose. All the free credit card applications, all the stuff that's sent to your house, make sure we do that. 72, 3 or more form of system attack. We have distributed denial of service. Use multiple systems to target a single system. Man in the middle, listening on the conversation and insert themselves in the middle to, usually man in the middle is used with another form of attack. Okay. Like poisoning, art poisoning, DNS poisoning, and other things. SQL injection. So spoofing is to use, right, an IP, a MAC address, an identifier that's duplicated from a trusted user in the network. So that way the system would see them as part of the network. Brute force is when true and try with cracking passwords, try all the characters until they get it correct. And we can do account lockout for that to stop it. Dictionary is to use common dictionary word in passwords. Okay, so those are just a few. There are a lot more. Security world is always changing, so and 73, how should an organization dispose mobile devices that are no longer in use? We need to shred, drill, and degauss. So punch holes through the device, take out the SD, right? Make sure that we shred or damage the SD so that way it doesn't read. Even if you wipe it one time, sometimes you have to clean data like 3 to 7 times in order for it all to go away. So you zero them out. '74, what should you do to recycle system devices? We can do, before we recycle, we would do low-level format storage devices that we would clear out the data. We would overwrite storage devices, zero out the data. We can wipe mass storage devices. So your storage, even if you put it through e-cycling, you have to clear it. Okay. Remnants of data that is sensitive can cause a lot of damage. All right. It's a little more. We're almost done. How can you improve performance of a Linux computer? You would remove unnecessary startup programs. We would disable system services that is not needed. We would install additional RAM, very similar to other OSs. 76, how do you fix the problem in Windows PC? If it's slow to boot, we want to check your boot order, disable startup services, and we can scan for malware. You can also go to safe mode and see, because safe mode reduce the resources and the services. So you can troubleshoot in safe mode. If the system is slow to load files, we can edit our registry, but be careful when you do that. And then if your application crashes, kill task, add RAM, clean, airflow vents, reboot, apply application updates, rollback updates. So if the updates is already installed, then we might consider rolling back, because sometimes there's a conflict. But we want to kill all the startup tasks. And then sometime low amount of RAM also slow or crash the application. Okay, I have a couple more minutes. I'm almost done. Why should you clear cache data of an app? To improve performance and stability of an app. Now, over time, it cached the data so that way if you reuse, right, like connection, resources, it still use that, but it takes up storage. 78, how can you reduce power drain on mobile devices? Disable unused services and apps. And disable unsuccessful connection, like to the network. So if it's keep looking for the Wi-Fi connection when you're in the zone where you can't connect to the Wi-Fi or cell tower, it's gonna use up your power. So we can put it on airplane mode. So when you have that like 8% on your phone, right, you can put it on airplane mode to kind of reduce the power use, and then stop some of the services on the app. How can you improve wireless security and mobile devices? We can disconnect it from unknown networks or public networks. Never connect to the public networks, because you don't know who's on there. Right? A lot of people go on there to look for other people's things. Hotels, airports, McDonald's, Walmart, you know. Disable Bluetooth when not in use. Sorry, I have a typo here. How can you better protect the data on the mobile devices? Use encryption, connect via VPN, avoid public Wi-Fi, and tethering. Because ad hoc network sometimes it lacks security. 81. How can you prevent unauthorized access of camera microphone access on the mobile device? You should restrict access to camera or microphone in apps. And we should always look at permissions for access when installing the app. I normally don't allow geolocation on the apps unless it's map and I have to use it. But the other type of apps, I don't allow a lot of the permissions, especially camera, because you know there are hacks that they turn on your camera on the device. It's not too difficult. 82, what should you include in a logical topology? We just went over this of the network. On the layout, you need to include computer network appliances like switch routers, security appliances like firewall, intrusion detection system, IPS. And on the logical topology, we want to include a list of IP addresses for our networks. '83. Why should a technician document an incident or a problem? To learn from the problem and the solution and improve when the incident occurs again. Okay. And an incident could be malware, it could be data breach, it could be attack, it could be somebody that unintentionally sent out email that contains private information of customers, a lost laptop, executive mobile phone was left at Starbucks, etc. '84, why should backups be tested? To ensure that data is available when backup is needed. Because sometimes, even when you do backup can be corrupted, right? And so we want to test it before making sure that we can use it to restore. Some software actually has this mechanism built in for backup. 85, what are the 5 types of computer-related toxic waste? Batteries, toner, CRT display, those are the big tube-like monitor, cell phones, and tablets. The protocols and services used in remote access, you can use SSH. We don't use Telnet because it's not secure, but it's there. And then RDP, remote desktop protocol for Windows. So on the Linux side, we can use SSH. Okay. On the Windows side, we can use RDP. And this is the end, my friend. If you miss anything, I can scroll back up, but all of these should be familiar to you as the assignments that we've done. Make sure that we complete our practice test for CompTIA A+ as it is graded. And also, you know, get ready for your final exam. So this is the last time that I'm going to see you via Zoom or in person. So I wish you have a good holiday. Type your name into the chat for attendance purposes if you like. And, you know, enjoy your break. And hope to see you in future classes. Take care. I have snacks here in the room, but only one student came.